There really is nowhere to hide now that the Casey report on group-based exploitation has been published and the national inquiry has preemptively been launched by Keir Starmer. I'm going to go through bits of this report in this video. I can't possibly do, and you with respect can't possibly expect a fully comprehensive review because this is 200 pages long, referring to extensive other references of information, which is sort of part of why I want to do this video, because again, with respect, I think a lot of people will misunderstand, underestimate, or worse still, I don't expect this of my viewers here, but worse still, some people will share ideas and just memes to dismiss and minimize a lot of what this means, which I think is quite disrespectful and underestimates the gravity of the impact on victims that this has had over many decades. But this is the National Audit Report on Group-Based Exploitation. I have to choose words carefully for YouTube. My channel is probably not big enough to just say what I wish without the video getting limited and then fewer people see it and so on, which obviously I don't want. I want people to see my videos. If you want to hear what I personally think about these things and how my initial reaction, my real reactions, as opposed to just talking to you about the law, you can find those on my new channel, BlackBeltBarrister Off the Record, where you can hear my pure views on it there. Many people have asked for my political views, etc., to be moved off this channel and focus on law. That is what I'm doing. So I hear you. I don't criticize you for making those comments. I encourage those comments. I encourage the feedback, be it positive, negative, and so on. Just know that I might disagree with you and we'll have to be adult about it. But this video is about that. Please do subscribe for reviews on the law as it stands on this channel. Now, in a lot of ways, this report has been necessary because of the sheer amount of pressure to launch a full national inquiry. And now I'll deal with the very first issue that a lot of people may raise. A lot of people have thrown back as an argument as to we don't need another inquiry, we just need to get on with doing things and so on. Well, there is a very good reason, well, several good reasons we need a full inquiry. And as opposed to a non-statutory inquiry, now just very briefly the difference, a statutory inquiry has the power to compel witnesses to come forward and to provide information and so on. A non-statutory inquiry does not have that power. Now, many people refer back to the 2022 report of the previous inquiry. Now, that, by its own admission, was based on inadequate, insufficient, and often flawed data, particularly with regard to ethnicity, which it detailed throughout that report and is detailed again through this report here. There are numerous references as to why that was just insufficient, and therefore this calls for another inquiry. Now, that previous report, based on flawed and inaccurate data, did not address many of the key issues, which are quite forthrightly dealt with in this Casey report here. And one of which has been the systematic and collective failure to address questions, particularly with regard to ethnicity of these gangs, which, as this report says here, has dominated political and institutional focus with energy devoted to proving a point on one hand or avoiding it or playing it down on the other, all the while with no definitive answer at a national level. And it goes on, I'm reading from the bit in orange, despite reviews, reports, and inquiries raising questions about men from Asian or Pakistani backgrounds and grooming and sexually exploiting young white girls, the system has consistently failed to fully acknowledge this or collect accurate data so that it can be examined effectively. Instead, and this is the reference I made to the previous inquiry, flawed data is used repeatedly to dismiss claims about Asian grooming gangs as sensationalized, biased, or untrue. And this goes on further in this report to say many of this even led to headlines to claim that it was predominantly white perpetrators, which was frankly flawed. This goes on here to say, instead, flawed data used to repeatedly dismiss claims about Asian grooming gangs as sensationally biased or untrue. This does a disservice to victims, indeed, and all law-abiding people in the Asian communities, and plays into the hands of those who want to exploit it to sow division. So failure to collect the data is a disservice to everybody and people from all backgrounds. Now, one of the examples of this, now I will put in a caveat when I show this video, because part of Keir Starmer's response here was to Elon Musk when Elon Musk was saying that Keir Starmer was complicit in all of this. So in part, I think he was responding to that, but I do think that he was speaking generally, at least it's been reported that he was speaking generally about people discussing these issues, where Keir Starmer said that they were spreading lies and misinformation. Now, I think that it's fair that Keir Starmer did respond robustly to what Elon Musk said. Elon Musk was obviously making allegations against him, and it was fair to respond to that. But more generally, his comment was received as follows. I'll play a very short snippet of it to you. And this is just one example of how media statements and headlines and statements generally from people in power can be misleading and dismissive of the real issues at hand. Listen to this.
On Twitter, those that are spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible, they're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves.
Now, I'm going to discuss this statement with you along with lots of other things throughout this report in just a moment. Don't go away. Now, as an aside, I've been doing some traveling around recently and had conversations and talking to people about how your machines can be hacked and compromised just by connecting to a Wi-Fi network when you're traveling around. You may be surprised at just how easy it is for some nefarious actors to hack essentially your machine or data sent to and from your machine. So allow me to give you a couple of ways that this happens and then what you can do about it. And the first one is data interception. Now, believe it or not, some unsecure Wi-Fi networks transmit data in plain text, allowing attackers to use various tools that I won't tell you about. I know what they're called, but I won't tell you about them, to sniff out and intercept these data packets so they can read sometimes your plain text passwords and login credentials and things like that. They are often done as part of a full-on man-in-the-middle attack, which I'll come to in a minute, but the unsecured Wi-Fi networks just allow some people, if so minded, to read the data that you put into websites. Now, straight away, that sounds really dangerous, does it not? But the second full-on man-in-the-middle attack is where they use manipulative software and they position some software on the network in between you and your intended destination. So what can happen is your machine thinks you're connecting to the bank, whereas really it's connecting to a bit of software in the middle and communicating with it and sending all the data to it. And therefore the software will retain your credentials. That's a man-in-the-middle attack. And finally, a combination of all these, sometimes referred to as an evil twin attack, where they use a fake Wi-Fi network that looks like, say, hotel guest or whatever. You connect to it and it forces upon you bad software and again does all of the above, steals your credentials, tracks what you're doing, and all of those kind of things. And with all these dangers around, that is why I'm happy to partner with NordVPN on this channel, because it helps to keep you safe when you're out and about and connecting to Wi-Fi networks. And with my unique link, you can get 4 months extra free along with your 30-day money-back guarantee. It will prevent you from connecting to malicious websites, it will prevent you from downloading malicious software, and it will make sure that all of your communications are encrypted and secure and safe online. And if the security wasn't quite enough to tempt you to try NordVPN just yet, take a look at the state of this Express website. I'm sorry, Express, but you got far too many adverts on there. I know, ironic, because this is kind of an advert, but watch what happens when I bring NordVPN on screen, click Quick Connect, it connects in seconds, I move it aside, and then I refresh this page here. Watch all those adverts disappear, and now I can read it very cleanly and clearly without all the interruptions of those adverts. So use my unique link, nordvpn.com/BBB, for your 4 months extra free and along with your 30-day money-back guarantee. And you will know that all of your devices for all of your family are secure when you go out on your travels. So check out NordVPN, and thank you for sponsoring this channel.
They're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves.
And this statement, along with others, such as these ministers and anybody else calling for this inquiry are, quote, jumping on a bandwagon of the far right, etc. All of these kind of statements, all of these kind of headlines only serve to further the dismissal and collective failure to which this report refers. So I'll take you through some bits of this report, but I cannot obviously do the full report justice because it's 200 pages long. We would be here for hours, and that is not the purpose of my channel here. My purpose is to give you some bold points to really encourage you to engage with it, acknowledge it, read it in full, because many people will make comments about this. Many people will share. I've seen memes that are criticizing that this report was done or that a new inquiry has been called because there was a previous inquiry and things of this nature. I think that is disrespectful because there is far more to this than any one dismissive line could possibly acknowledge. So let me take you first of all to this section here, which deals with ethnicity, why it matters. Now, there are a number of sections that deal with ethnicity, but this is one of them. It says, it is not racist to want to examine the ethnicity of offenders. The examination of ethnicity in crime for offenders and victims should be about seeing how offending can be better understood and tackled. Effective crime prevention, disruption, and prosecution is based on a good understanding of the context, the nature, and the profile of the offenders, and victims. That is one of the reasons that recording ethnicity has been a feature of crime statistics of many years. But as you'll see through this report when you read it in detail, this has been a systemic failure for many years because this data has routinely not been recorded, or in some instances and setups where police information, by way of example, is recorded on multiple different systems that do not routinely communicate with each other. This data has not been communicated across these platforms, and thus there's a bit of failure to identify these crimes when they occurred. Furthermore, it says we need maturity and honesty in debate about ethnicity of perpetrators of group-based child exploitation. Assertions that the majority of child sexual offenders are white, even if true, are at best misleading. In a population with over 80% of people of white ethnicity, it should always be a significant issue when people from a white background are not in the majority of victims or perpetrators of crime. It should also be a significant issue when any community or social group appears disproportionately overrepresented as victims or perpetrators of crime. In such cases, the underlying factors that have contributed to the situation deserve investigation. So this is acknowledging the very importance of ethnicity and why we should be paying close attention to it. Worse still, this report then goes on to say that the people who downplay the ethnicity of perpetrators are continuing to let down society, local communities, and victims, past and future, by not looking harder at the nature of offending in order to better understand it and better prevent it. Ignoring the issues, not examining and exposing them in this light, allows the criminality and depravity of a minority of men to be used to marginalise whole communities rather than opening up the possibility of understanding it better. And if that wasn't bad enough, I can tell you that this report points back to research that was done in 2017 that was dismissed by the Home Office in 2020. So they knew this all along, but for flimsy reasons, in my view, it was dismissed. Because if I told you that there was a report that did claim that 84% of group-based exploitation was committed by Asian heritage men, but this was dismissed, that would make you quite frustrated. But that was precisely what happened and has been pointed to in this Casey report here. Page 127, a report by Quilliam, which was 2017, into group-based child exploitation, dissecting grooming gangs, etc. This claimed that 84% of group-based exploitation was committed by Asian heritage men. But this was dismissed by researchers because their methodology and selection process used was not stated. And this dismissal was then endorsed by the Home Office in its 2020 report. Now, this is not me to say absolutely conclusively that their original research was 100% correct, but it was dismissed. But now we're looking back and it seems they might have been onto something, but instead it was just dismissed and quietly moved on, which is pretty much the overriding criticism throughout this report, that things were repeatedly ignored, dismissed, downplayed, and people just moved on. After a flurry of activity of sorts, people just moved on and didn't do any more. Now let's take a look at the discussion of ethnicity in local reviews and inquiries. The Casey report says, in our examination of local serious case reviews, discussed in chapters 4 and 5, 12 out of 50 reviews they considered included information about ethnicity of perpetrators of child exploitation. Of these reviews, only 5 examined the ethnicity of perpetrators as a potential factor in the offending behaviour. Where ethnicity was identified as a potential factor, 2 reviews recommended undertaking a national research of the profiles, motivations, cultural and background influences of perpetrators involved in the exploitation. And the reviews also suggested publishing guidance for practitioners on the most effective methods to reduce such offences. But then it goes on to say, more often than not, the official reports do not discuss the perpetrators, let alone their ethnicity or any cultural drivers. It says there is a palpable discomfort in any discussion of ethnicity in most of them. Where ethnicity is mentioned, it's referred to by euphemisms such as the local community or buried deep in the report and only vaguely referenced in any context, index or executive summary. Most choose to reside in more comfortable territory of examination and discussion of systems, processes, multi-agent partnerships, etc. These are important, and it's essential to identify and learn the lessons from failures. But it is also vital to be rigorous in trying to understand the nature of motivations for offending if agencies are better to protect children. Some of the exceptions, such as the J report in Rotherham, it says, was notable in the directness in identifying the ethnicity of mainly Pakistani men who were offending in that town, calling for more action to be taken to investigate and understand what lay behind this and the role ethnicity took and how the system responded. This eventually led to the councillors who presided over these failures to stand down. Similarly, in a thematic review carried into child exploitation committed in Newcastle by perpetrators from a diverse range of backgrounds, including Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian, Iranian, Iraqi, Kurdish, Turkish, etc., and it recommended that government conduct research into the cultural drivers of offending and sought to understand the motivations behind the offending by interviewing the offender who agreed to contribute to the review. And it says further down that the publication of prosecutions of offenders is a well-established method for police to encourage other victims to come forward. And it says here, reading from the bit in orange, we heard from police forces that local authorities would discourage them from publicising the successful conviction of perpetrators of group-based exploitation due to fears of raising tensions. Whereas, again, as I've just said, it says publicising successful prosecutions is a well-established method for police to encourage victims to come forward, especially those that are historically underreported, like child abuse and exploitation. Instead of examining whether there's a disproportionality in ethnicity or cultural factors at play in certain types of offending, we found many examples of organisations avoiding the topic altogether for fear of appearing racist, raising community tensions or causing community cohesion problems. It is right for police forces and local authorities in particular to pay attention to the potential impacts of any investigation on the community cohesion, particularly given the history of riots and other disturbances, etc., and that issues that challenge community cohesion need careful and sensitive handling, and a level of honesty, which will not come with ignoring the uncomfortable issues or taking what might be deemed to be an easy way out. Ultimately, you can get a broad understanding of all of this from the foreword, the executive summary, and the conclusions in this report. If you only read some of it, I'd suggest you read at least those before forming any opinions, but ideally all of it if you really want to form an informed opinion on all of these issues. One of the elements with which I absolutely agree is the calling here for legislation to be tightened up so that this offence, the bit highlighted in orange here, has absolutely no excuses and no defence. Because, as Baroness Casey put it here, I believe many jaws across the country would drop if it was widely known that doing so is called anything but that. And I would agree. I think if you were to read bits of this report, for example, discussing the age of consent, where they say that many of these cases have been either dropped or downgraded to lesser charges because they were said to be in love with or had consented to this with the perpetrator. And this is said in part to be due to it being a grey area in law because although any of this activity is unlawful, the decision on whether to charge and which offence with which to charge this perpetrator is left open to interpretation. And this has led to all sorts of unacceptable outcomes. For example, them saying that they're in a relationship or in love with and all these kind of things, which is absolutely wrong. And so one of the things called for here is to remove all of those excuses and possible defences and make this an absolute offence. Furthermore, the foreword says to prevent all of this, we need to understand it, and we have failed as a country in our duty to do that to date. The appalling lack of data on ethnicity in crime recording alone is a major failing over the last decade or more. Questions about ethnicity have been asked but dodged for years. Instead of examination, we've seen obfuscation, creating confusion and deflecting. In a vacuum, incomplete and unreliable data is used to suit the ends of those presenting it. The system claims that there is an overwhelming problem of white perpetrators when that can't be proved. This does no one any favours at all, least of those in the Asian, Pakistani or Muslim communities who needlessly suffer as those with malicious intent use this obfuscation to sow and spread hatred. And ultimately, of course, there are conclusions and recommendations. I would encourage you to read at least these bits, if not the full report. I think as a country, we owe it to every victim to at least read and understand this, however unpalatable it might be. But this goes on to say that this is an opportunity for government and for our policing, justice and safeguarding agencies across the country as a whole to draw a line in the sand between all the previous reviews and make a new commitment to take a series of significant actions to make sure that we don't end up back here again in a few years' time. So I put this to anybody that shares something about the previous report, the previous investigations, etc. Read this report and you will more fully understand why this is absolutely necessary. This conclusion says these actions need to be accompanied by commitments to be honest, transparency, and prioritising the safety of children above all else, by an apology to all of the victims of this exploitation who have been let down in the past by a more rigorous and relentless pursuit in the minority of men who have preyed on vulnerable children and looked for gaps in our safeguarding systems to commit heinous crimes. Unless government and all the organisations involved are able to stand up and acknowledge the failures of the past, to apologise for them unreservedly, and to act now to put things right, including current cases, we'll not move on as a society. So I urge you again to read this report, particularly if you are in the camp of believing that the previous report and inquiry was sufficient and therefore we don't need another one. Now more than ever, I would encourage you to read the full thing and not just rely on any one bit of news, any one bit of reporting or sharing information. That has been, as you've seen, part of the problem. Even down to Keir Starmer, let's say that the best possible scenario here in that snippet that I played you at the beginning of the video, the best possible scenario is that Keir Starmer was defending himself against accusations by Elon Musk, which he will obviously defend. But at worst, it is just another example of a public statement, media statement of sorts that dismisses all of this as a far-right bandwagon that he called it at the end. And so I think that is disgraceful. And as a nation, we ought to be ashamed. And so for that, I would urge you to read this report. I thank you so much for watching. Please do subscribe to my channel here for bringing this law to you as it is. And again, if you want my personal views on any of these things, please do pop over to my channel off the record, and I'll tell you exactly what I think about all of these issues there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.